I think empathy at the end of the day is really remembering we're dealing with human beings. And so one of the best gifts that we can give each other is helping each other feel heard, seen, and understood. So empathy is really just that, by us showing up in front of others and helping the speaker truly feel that they're seen with no agenda, heard with no filters, and understood as they are. And so that's what empathy means to me in leadership. And that's the best thing that a leader can do to inspire trust and bring people along.
Hello, and welcome to the Care to Lead podcast, the show that dives deep into the art of communication and leadership, bringing insights from the foremost thinkers and corporate trailblazers. Today, I am pleased to have with me Dr. Alex Chan. Dr. Alex Chan is a true force in change on a mission to humanize work and drive meaningful corporate reform. With a career that spans academia, award-winning research, business consulting, and executive leadership, Dr. Chan brings a unique perspective to the table. In the late 90s, she embarked on her journey as a tenure-track assistant professor at Cornell University, where her research and teaching earned accolades. Over the years, she transitioned into a prominent role as a research-based business consulting leader, also serving as a trusted career and life coach. Driven by her passion for making a difference within the corporate world, Dr. Chan made a strategic move to a healthcare technology company where she held key leadership positions, including overseeing the strategy and market intelligence, just one step away from the C-suite. Today, Dr. Alex Chan can leverage her rich tapestry of experience in research, teaching, consulting, coaching, and corporate executive leadership to offer invaluable insights in leadership development and career transition. She is currently working on a compelling book that promises to reshape the way we view work and leadership. And welcome. And did I miss anything in your bio, Dr. Chan?
Not at all. You make me sound so much better.
You have so much to offer. You're bringing so much to the table. So I am really excited to welcome you to the Care to Lead podcast. Can you share with us your backstory, your specific career path? Tell us how you ended up making the twists and turns.
Yeah, happy to speak to that. I would just say that there was a pivotal moment right before Y2K. For those of us who are old enough to remember that, I was sitting at this banquet at Cornell to honor entrepreneurship. And I said to this lady just so long ago, she said, the most interesting people in their lives would have done very different things by the end of their career looking back. And so I add this piece in addition to what I've shared before to underscore how I've reflected on, as she said, start out as an academic, then transition into business consulting, leveraging my research background, then felt called into the corporate world to serve. And then now at the second half of my life, really thinking about how to bring all these experiences to bear to make a difference. And after the last several years that we have all gone through with the pandemic inspired, induced changes, and we're all seeking balance and more meaning in our lives, what a better way to apply my skills and experiences to reform the place where most of us spend at least 1/3 of our waking hours. And this is also the sector that owns the livelihood of a lot of people. So I feel really passionate and on a mission to make it as good as for everybody as possible.
And you do some work in career transition as well. I'm passionate about it as well. I do a lot of career transition on the executive level. Where's your niche? What do you like to do in career transition?
So everybody has their own tools, but I like to start with something that's pretty simple. So first, I would have my client assess the intersection between the interest and aptitude. And so as we grow and change as individuals, our interests and passions change as well. So when we start off early in our career, we may be really inspired to emulate someone. And so we build our skills that way. And then as we do that for 5, 10, 20 years, it becomes been there, done that. And so what's next? And so it depends on where my client is in their specific specific personal development stage, we assess where they are and look at what still applies to them that's matched with who they are and go from there.
I think I agree with you like wholeheartedly, because one of the things that I always tell clients is that the person that existed when you chose your career no longer exists. Like everything has changed, all these life experiences and everything. So figuring out your career, especially as we get older, we look at it and it's not what do we want to do from here? It's who do we want to be? And I think that is really key for people. And it sounds like you're resonating and saying pretty much something very similar to that.
Yeah. And so I think there are so many great coaches out in the market, and we all serve slightly different audiences. And to me, the folks who come to me are right at that cusp of deciding who they want to be and recognizing that they've achieved so much success doing what they're supposed to do. And how do they not lose all that altogether and bring the best of that piece and be a lot more authentic about who they become going forward as a leader?
What do you consider to be the most interesting turning point in your career journey? I mean, you've had a lot of twists and turns and made a lot of choices. What's the most interesting one?
Well, let me level set, right? Interesting. At this point, looking back is interesting. At the time I was going through it was really painful.
Fair enough.
It really was leaving academia to enter the business world. Again, it lines up with a milestone birthday in my life. I was turning 30 and looking back and thought I had set all these goals for myself. I have achieved so much, got a PhD, won awards in both teaching and research. I've done pretty much everything I wanted to do professionally. Of course, it's not ending yet, but there were other personal milestones that I haven't achieved. And so it kind of rocked my world. And so I realized that the idealistic part of me, now I'm speaking like one of my clients, the idealistic part of me got into a profession that sounded good, but left a big part of me unfulfilled. And so that set off a pretty long journey, but the transition out of academia into the business sector, but still bringing along my research skills and teaching skills, again, in hindsight, were very useful. But at the time, it was really jarring, very, very jarring. And I had all kinds of judgments about, as an academic professional, what the business people were doing. So I became one of them. So that was the most jarring at the time, but most interesting at this point, because it really serves me very well and my clients as well.
Yeah, the more vast experience you could bring and the different kinds of backgrounds are so helpful to your clients. What makes your approach to coaching and consulting stand out?
I think it comes down to just be a good listener. I think there's so many great tools out there. And just yesterday, I was connecting with one of my contemporaries, and it really made me think about how easily we can get lost in the tools that we use to serve clients. Ultimately, it's really sitting down and being present with a client and listening to what they're saying and listening to what they're not saying. Because I've found that 80%, to kind of give it a rough number, 80% of what makes me effective with a client right within 5 minutes of speaking with them is really hearing what they're not saying. And so when I'm paraphrasing back to them, because I always want to confirm that I heard the right thing, I get this reaction a lot. Oh my gosh, how do you see me? So they literally push back because they felt so disarmed. And so I think, we can, of course, we have a professional responsibility to update our skills and make sure that we can serve those who are called to serve really well, but never, ever stop really listening to the person.
I think you're right. I think people are so not used to being heard. I mean, just in our society in general, we do an exercise with executives a lot, and we work with the whole C-suite team, is we don't make them. We have an exercise where one talks for like 3 minutes and the other person is not allowed to respond. And it's so uncomfortable, but it's such a valuable lesson because they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I wanted to interject, how much I'm thinking about, what I want to say next. So listening is such a powerful tool. And I think that your approach to making that really important in your coaching is great modeling for your clients.
I agree with you. And I think that that's a great practice that you called out in terms of the instructions, not just 3 minutes of not interrupting someone, but the instruction to say that when you're listening, you're looking for points of connection. You're looking for points of understanding and points that you can relate to that person. So we can bypass and interrupt the automatic part of us who wants to respond, wants to fix, and wants to one up that person, what they're saying.
Right. One of the things that we always say is, and follow up with a question. And so in the beginning, the leaders will be going like, well, I can't think of any question. I can't think of a question, which I ask them just like, follow your curiosity. Because if you're really listening, you're going to be curious about something.
Exactly. I think the typical work culture, we've been so brainwashed to look for results, to maximize results, that we forget that we're just people relating to each other. And so by remembering that, we're listening to another human being sharing. And for just even 3 minutes, as she said, forget that we're driving for results. We're driving for the best outcome. That way we establish so much more rapport and trust and ability to work together.
So in your article, you talked about discernment and intentionality. So could you provide an example of how those impact your leadership?
Yes, I think most of your listeners will be able to relate to this. How many times, especially when we're in a high pressure, everything was due yesterday kind of environment, you log into email and then you get an email from a superior, whether it's your direct boss or somebody else, who comes up with the latest fire drill, whatever it may be. It could be a competitor making a move that when you analyze what the move is, it's really more public relations management. It's nothing scary. But those kinds of fire drills that tend to happen on a daily basis in some places requires the leader, and I've experienced that, to take a step back instead of reflexively then thinking about who on the team can address that. I would be the interceptor and look at the situation and decide whether or not this is something worth bumping something else for the day to pay attention to. And I've done this many times. And so in many cases, the person who was issuing the order to address the fire drill may get a response from me saying that this is not necessary to deal with for these reasons. And more than half the time, my teams don't even know about it because I had already dealt with that. And so by me providing that kind of cover for my teams to stay focused on what's important, that's how I exercise my discernment to focus on what we as teams decided that we're going to focus on. Now, of course, we revisit that on a regular basis, but the discernment as a leader is to figure out what's truly important and if it's necessary to disrupt our existing plan. And so we'll stay focused on our intention to accomplish certain things.
So you talked about the fire drill thing. What's interesting is it doesn't matter what industry, it doesn't matter what level, it doesn't matter any of these things. Every single day, every single leader that I interact with will tell me that they feel like they're constantly putting out fires. So it is such a culturally embedded thing in our society that I think it needs addressed on a lot of levels, not just on that individual moment by moment, but what are we doing as far as teaching leaders to make those decisions and use that discernment?
So I have to say it has to happen at multiple levels. I think starting from the top, which is where this all begins, we have somehow allowed leaders to exist and perform in an environment where they have the luxury of seeing something happen, and the knee-jerk reaction is to push it down to someone to handle it. And so we don't, first of all, teach the executive leaders at the top to exercise a little bit of thinking there. Is this really something that's important to handle? Or to coach them into saying that I think this is something worth checking into. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not this is something we have to address. Now, the next level down, again, I've learned this, never mind now, like 20, 30 years ago, that somehow these middle layers don't feel that they have the power to push back or to explain that I don't think this is something that we need to worry about. And so then they in turn push it down further to their teams. And if you think about the effect that trickles down to the different layers, we get burnout. And so I think at the risk of oversimplifying this, we, especially in our profession of coaching, we can help communication at the top level to say, you have so much to deal with. You may see something show up, whether it's a news feed or somebody sending you a note and say, hey, your competitor is up to this. You may want to look into that. Just to add a little note to whoever you're delegating this to say, I'm not sure how serious this is. You have the authority. You have the power to decide if we need to do something about it. Have that practice be repeated each layer down.
And I think there's a little bit of a flip side on that whole thing too, where there are leaders that are there's for various reasons, they don't push things down, and not because they don't feel empowered to, but they want to hold on to it. And often leaders feel that if they're not needed, they won't have a job, or if they push it down, they just don't trust the other person to do it. And I think it's important in this whole fireman, putting out fires mentality for people to understand that as a leader, part of your job is teaching the next level of leaders to lead. And you can't do that if you're doing their job, right?
Exactly. So I've found that usually at the highest level, when something comes along, they push it down. And they're the originator of the fire drills. Mm-hmm. It's the next layer and then the layers down that tend to exhibit the fear-based behavior that you mentioned just now, Cynthia. Unfortunately, the prominent unexamined cause of problems in the workplace is this fear, as you said. If I don't do this, I'm going to lose my job. If I don't do this, I'm going to appear weak. If I don't do this, I'll appear as if I'm not a team player. So I got to do this. And then at the same time, there's another problem. And that is out of fear that we will not look good, we don't trust other people to do as well as we do. So we hang on to it. And so I would say, this is a piece of advice I got from a mentor early in my career. Think about, are you the best person to do this? And if you lead a team of people, what value do you add to this when you don't have time? You don't have the time to see through it. What value do you add to solving this problem by hanging on to it? Is there trusting the people that you handpicked in most cases to get this done? So I think it is that double-edged sword with the fear that I'm going to look stupid and not do what my boss or my superior said, but also the fear that if I don't do it myself, then it's not going to be done right. So that's just a bad deal for the middle manager and the leaders in the middle tiers.
So let's go on to the topic of empathy. The reason this entire Authority Magazine series exists is because empathy and leadership is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So I wanted to talk to other leaders who are equally passionate about it. So in your situation, how do you define empathy in a leadership context?
Absolutely. I think empathy at the end of the day is really remembering we are dealing with human beings. And so one of the best gifts that we can give each other is helping each other feel heard, seen, and understood. So empathy is really just that. So by us showing up in front of others and helping the speaker, whoever has the 3 minutes, as she said, to truly feel that they're seen with no agenda, heard with no filters, and understood as they are. And so that's what empathy means to me in leadership. And that's the best thing a leader can do to inspire trust and bring people along.
That is I love that definition. That is just so well said.
Thank you.
So I think you have a book coming out. Is it Empathy and Leadership? Can you tell me a little bit more about your book?
I would love to. The foundation of the book is basically why, after all the tools and all the strategies and all the great thinkers out there, do we still have the problems that we face? And the latest of which are burnout. After coming out of the pandemic, burnout, especially for women, continues to rise, despite the fact that more and more books and tools and systems come out. And why do we still have a workplace issue where there's lack of inclusion? Again, there's no lack of experts and really thoughtful solutions. Why do we still have these problems? It's because the underlying fears, some of which we just talked about, remains unaddressed. So the book sets out to very clearly lay out the problems and the fear that lies at the root of that. And how do we empower the solutions that are already in place by recognizing that we want to introduce more love-based values in the workplace? And when I say love, it's not the touchy-feely romantic love connotations that popular culture would suggest. It really has to do with love as a neutralizer of fears, such as and including empathy. Other things like generosity, forgiveness, and trust, true empowerment, not just in lip service. And so the book will be showcasing the research I have done and also experience in working with clients, in addition to my own personal experience, in looking at if we actually see the fear underlying these issues and look at how, when we update the values underneath something like empathy, how that would actually empower the solutions and some new thinking that will continue to come up to actually address the root issues. I'll give you a very specific example here since we're talking about empathy. A few years back, one of my fellow executive coaches said, empathy, even though it sounds good, it sounds very common sense and everybody should do it. It is not commonplace in the workplace because it sounds threatening. And at first I thought, why would empathy threaten? It seems to be the opposite. But what it is that we have this unexamined fear in the workplace, like what you said earlier. If I don't do this, I'll lose my job. If I don't do this, I'll lose out. If I don't do this, I'll appear weak. And so when we don't address that underlying fear, we can talk empathy till our faces turn blue, and it will be an isolated discussion that doesn't fit into the culture of the workplace. And so my book sets out to connect the problems that remain unsolved with the unaddressed fear and how do we solve this fear by introducing love-based values such as empathy, and how do we practically do that?
It's super, super interesting to me in particular, because I am working on a book as well right now. It's coming out in the early spring, but it's very similar. Like the parallels are very similar. My book is called Dark Drivers, and it's about hidden or past traumas and experiences and these things that lie dormant until they're triggered. And the reason I tie it so tightly to empathy is because when a leader starts to understand their own dark drivers, when they start to say, oh crap, that's why I'm reacting that way all the time. You know, when I was 6, this happened. I remember that and I felt like an idiot, and I never want to feel like an idiot again. And so they're immediately defensive in certain situations. And that's like a really example. But once they start to figure that out, the empathy comes in, because now when I'm looking at someone and they're triggered, instead of just like thinking they're a jerk, what are they so triggered about? I didn't say anything. We're going to have this different empathy because I'll bet they have some dark drivers of their own. And while it's not our job as leaders to be their psychologists, we certainly can have more compassion and reframe how we do things and notice when people react and trigger and they tense up. And you can notice it on a video call. You can notice it on a phone call. You can notice when you trigger people. And I think empathy, it's really connected to being that attuned.
I look forward to reading that book. I cannot agree with you more. I think one of the things that we can do more of in spreading, I think one of your contributions is to spread thought leadership, right? And so when we have our own individual focus on how to improve the workplace through leadership, to me, pieces of thought leadership like yours in terms of helping leaders understand what's behind that behavior. To me, the piece I'll add to is the intersection between leadership and the culture that's being woven into the workplace. And especially when we can help leaders at the highest level become aware of why they behave the way that they do. And more importantly, they have the power to change that. Not only do they set the tone for others, we can borrow from neuroscience that the mirror neurons in our brain is constantly unconsciously copying someone else's behavior. And so, right now, I think if listeners want to play with that, we're getting into that year-end holidays where you're getting together with families, just becoming aware of how they may trigger you. And consciously, we go back to intentionality. I set the intention to show up differently and see how that affects other people's behavior back to you. Because we all constantly and consciously copying each other. So when you have a leader, especially the higher you are, the way you show up in front of your subordinates and you alter the way you consciously choose the way you behave, people in the meeting room, in a Zoom meeting, they're going to respond differently. They're not even going to be aware of why all of a sudden they themselves are softened. I see that time and again working with my clients in that way. I said, just play with this one meeting, set one intention with this one person that always bugs you. You select how you want them to respond. You behave that way. It's just watch how they respond to you. It works time and again. So I look forward to your book, and with more leaders applying those kinds of skills, they can change the culture.
Well, I think what you're saying is just so empowering. And it sounds like everything that you're doing is giving back the power to those leaders. When does your book come out and what's it called?
Well, so the working title is being debated and negotiated right now. So the book publishing process.
I sure do.
So the tentative title of my book is Reforming the Corporation. Subtitle is Where Business Thrives and People Are Happy.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love it. And it's so positive and bright with my dark driver shit. But it's like, you want to go somewhere in life. I love that title. Do talk about how empathy humanizes leaders and makes them more relatable. Is there anyone in particular in your experience, in your life, mentor, who really showed you that or was the epitome of that?
As I'm hearing your question, this former mentor popped into my mind. And it wasn't who I was thinking about when I originally did the in-depth interview with you. It is actually the chairperson of the department where I got my master's many moons ago. He's now not with us anymore. And so this gentleman, he was very, very different from your stereotypical chairperson. And he was a Caucasian male as well. And so again, all the stereotypes that you could associate with being a white male figure who has authority and power. He was very soft-spoken. His speech is very slow. So now I'm slowing down my speech as I remember him. And while he was definitely an intellectual powerhouse, otherwise he wouldn't be running a department, his speech and his thought process was always very relatable, very human, and very fluid. Again, everything that opposite of what you think of as a white male powerhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm remembering him, and it's exactly the kinds of qualities of empathy that will serve the workplace really well right now.
And it sounds like it had a massive impact on you as well.
Yes. And, just a little bit more personally in that regard. At the time, he had a daughter who was my age. And so he would constantly joke with me that he was my Chinese uncle. So here's the humanizing part. He was my mentor, but he was always relating to me as a human being and making it very personal to me that there's a connection with his daughter who's the same age.
That's excellent. And so that's another example of how empathy builds trust. Because I know that in your work, you stipulate how important trust is in leadership.
Yes, it really is. Yeah, trust is not, I know that it's probably one of those words that's a little overused, and people may kind of think of it as Charlie Brown, when, somebody talking about trust again. And trust is not something that we could manipulate, that we could artificially say, we got to trust each other. And it's not that just because we say it, it happens. It's really about whether it starts with, again, whether or not people around you feel that you see them, you understand them, and you listen to them. This unspoken feeling and knowing that no matter what happens, we have each other's backs. It's not just for the good times, but also it's safe for me to take risks because I'm not going to be afraid I'm going to lose my job. So back to the fear part, I'm not going to be afraid that because I try this and it doesn't work, I'm going to lose my job because I know you have my back. And so that's a very fluid connection that comes from helping others feel seen, heard, and understood, that they trust that you have their back, and then they do their best because they don't worry about failing and the consequences of failing.
So that makes me curious about your thoughts on the culture of risk, on an organizational culture where people are willing to take risk. What do you think, in your expertise, what would you tell a leader about how to get across to his team that it's okay to take risk, that we know you're going to make mistakes? How would you suggest a leader do that?
Yes, that's a very good question. So I'll preface that by saying that in my experience directly and through my clients, most workplaces aren't built for that. They say that they reward risk-taking, but they don't really.
Take risk, but don't mess up.
Exactly. There are some examples where that does work out, and some of them have published. So if someone goes and Googles Intuit, for instance, it's consistently one of the top workplaces that performs well. And so at least one piece talks about the linkage between risk-taking and results. And another case study is to study Microsoft. So we don't have a lot of time to go into details. I would love to talk about that sometime if we want. But back to your question on how do we coach leaders into doing that? So to be practical, every leader, if they have done their job right, they will have agreed with their teams on a quarterly, monthly, weekly basis what needs to be done. Build a little percentage of that time for experimentation and let the teams tell you, how are we going to achieve these goals? And how am I going to structure my time so that there's a famous Google 20% in the past, not anymore, where 20% time is just free-flowing experimentation. And so we talked about empowerment earlier. Empower the teams to structure their own 20% or however many percent, but always you as a leader, keep them focused on. As long as we can achieve these goals that we all collectively set out and agree to achieve, you have that freedom in that bucketed playtime. And so that way you have the space to take risks. And if it doesn't bear out, nobody knows about it. If it bears out, then the goals that we set out to accomplish is even that much better because you came up with an innovative solution.
Yeah, I love that. And, you said if it doesn't work out, nobody knows about it. One of the things that I suggest sometimes to my leaders, when they have meetings, they'll often start with, let's go around the room and celebrate our wins and everybody share a win so we can all, and I'm like, why don't you celebrate your failures too? Because they can't fail unless they took a risk, and your organization cannot survive unless your teams take risks.
I love that because, this is a way to change the manic outcomes-oriented culture where only results matter. And so as long as we continue that culture, like you said, take risks, but don't fail. And so I will go one step further because there are case studies in terms of how companies celebrate failures. So in the sharing of failure, also add, what did we learn from that? Because failures are really teachers for us to do better. And so just because we try something, it didn't work, it doesn't mean that the idea is bad. What do we learn? How can we try again?
Right. And how many times do we have to fail before we move forward with success? What is one piece of advice that you would give a new leader stepping into the C-suite for the very first time? What would you like to impart on them?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm humbled to be asked that. I think the best advice I can give a first-time C-suite member is to remember what makes you unique and what makes you special, that you're given a seat at the table. Resist the temptation to look around you and be like them, because being like them is not how you got there. Being yourself, they saw something in you that you have a unique contribution. Don't lose that.
I love that. That's such good advice. And again, as with everything that has come out of your mouth during this interview, it's empowering. You seem to be a very empowering coach. I love that. And do you have anywhere in particular you would like our listeners to find you if they wanted to reach out? Is LinkedIn the best place, or your website? What would you like to share?
Thanks for providing this opportunity. I think LinkedIn is the best because that's the platform where I'm experimenting, talking about playing, right? And taking risks. I am working out some of the stories and examples and research I want to share in my book as I'm writing it. And so that's a good way for folks to get to know my work and also give me feedback. If they think that I'm completely off base, let me know. If they think that I'm right on, let me know that too.
Oh, that's awesome. So I can't thank you enough for joining us today. You've shared invaluable insights on how empathy can affect our leadership, and you've given such inspirational, empowering words. And to our listeners, remember, empathy is not about being weak or soft. It's about being relatable, building trust. And our guest today, Dr. Chan, had the best definition right from the beginning. And I can't do better than that. So thank you for joining us on this episode of the Care to Lead podcast, brought to you in partnership with Authority Magazine. We hope that you found it valuable and inspiring. Until next time, remember, leaders who care to lead.